Alright, so there's some people getting deceived again by preterism, which is one of the dumbest false doctrines you could ever fall for. And the biggest thing that I can say about preterism is that it exposes the fact that you don't really care about anyone else but yourself. Right? In Romans 11, Paul says, "And lest you be wise in your own conceits, do not be ignorant of this thing, that Israel are blind in part, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, and then Jacob is turned away from ungodliness, and all Israel is saved." Don't be ignorant of this. Right? Okay. So Israel being blind in part is talking about the fact that when the northern kingdom of Israel got divorced from God and dispersed out of the land of the inheritance and were exiled into Assyria for 390 years and then didn't return after the 390 years, that punishment was increased sevenfold from Leviticus 26, and it became 2,730 years long, that curse. Right? However, God uses this curse and he turns it into a blessing, and this is how he brings salvation to the Gentiles, because the seed of the house of Israel is going to be dispersed into all the Gentile nations, and it becomes a spiritual seed instead of a physical seed, right? This is how God did it. This is how he brought salvation to the Gentiles. And he needed that 2,000 years so he needed the 2,730 years, but then 2,000 years from the Messiah, he needed that time to allow the physical seed to be totally dispersed to the four corners of the world. And you know that it's 2,000 years from the Messiah because Peter says, don't be ignorant, that the Messiah is going to tarry with the Father for 2,000 years before he returns. Right? And the apostles clearly knew this as well, because when John writes Revelation, he writes it to the 7 churches. And the 7 churches are all in Asia Minor, which is Assyria, which is where the house of Israel were dispersed. Because he knows that eventually the people who read here and do the things written in the book of Revelation in the final generation, they're going to be of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay? So, if John is writing Revelation in like 90 AD, and he's talking to the churches of the house of Israel, who are all still in Asia Minor, but apparently the Messiah returned in 70 AD, something isn't adding up there. Because if the Messiah returned in 70 AD, then the house of Israel should have been with him. So why is John writing to the house of Israel in Asia Minor 20 years later? You see, people don't understand these things because they don't care about other people. The reason why I understand what I've just gone through is because I used to sit there and think, well, how is salvation coming to the Gentiles? How does that actually work? Because I understand full well what Exodus 19 says, where God says, if you obey this covenant, I will be your God and you will be my people. You have to be part of Israel to be God's people. So the Gentiles weren't part of his people unless they were grafted into Israel. Well, because Israel were divorced from God, the natural branches were cut off, so the wild branches could get grafted in. That's how salvation comes to the Gentiles. They become grafted into Israel because they take what the house of Israel lost. Right? And you need 2,000 years for that to happen, because clearly, even by 90 AD, the house of Israel still had not dispersed to the four corners of the world. You know, and then that's the biggest one for me. But then you got things like, in the millennial reign, God is going to restore the pure language. That hasn't happened. He's going to restore the calendar. That hasn't happened. Israel will learn war no more. That hasn't happened. The two sticks being brought back together. That hasn't happened. The feasts being restored. That hasn't happened. Yeshua and the 144,000 ruling and reigning on the earth. That has not happened. Do you think the church would have gone full-blown apostate if Yeshua and the 144,000 were ruling and reigning with the Messiah? No. Like, you genuinely have to be so biblically thick, which in the northeast of England means dumb. You have to be so biblically dumb to believe this doctrine. And the only people who do believe this doctrine are people who just want to puff themselves up and seem like some big smarty pants. And the fact that they believe in this doctrine proves that they despise prophecy, which means that they're not part of the 1 Thessalonians 5 group. So ironically, the people who are saying, yeah, I don't think that we're heading towards Great Tribulation, I think we're heading towards the Great White Throne Judgment. Well, ironically, because you say that, now you're going to go into Great Tribulation. Well done. Well done.